Introduction to computers. We're starting a new unit, Unit 5, Communications. We've already talked about hardware. We spent quite a bit of time on hardware, quite a bit of time on software. We talked about lots of items dealing with those. Our next step, then, the last major topic before we go into tying it into businesses, would be networks. Connecting devices, allowing a device, for example, a device here in the room, in our classroom, to communicate out maybe to a server that's in the same local area network. So we're talking about moving data. We talked about today the different types of data that we might be moving, everything from videos to downloading software to texting to emails and so forth. So this unit is talking about communications. Later on we'll talk about security, but for right now we're talking about how we connect. Alright, so over here, and we'll talk more about this diagram later on, over here we talked about three major terms that we need to understand, and these will make more sense as we go along, but we talked about protocols to start with. Rules for transmission of data. You know, how does this PC talk to the switch and then the information actually get to this server, or maybe eventually out to the internet. We have different rules in which we communicate, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. How much can we send, bits per second, our bandwidth, and then what do we send it across? We've already talked about these things. When you're going to wire, we can send it in the air. There's a wide range of ways in the air, or we can send it fiber optic. And there's actually going to be a couple things we'll talk about in fiber optic, multi-mode and single mode. So, sure. And we can talk a little bit more about this. Okay, so in here, how do we get from a PC all the way out to the internet and then to some web server sitting on the internet? The PC communicates using some protocol to get to the switch, or you could have maybe a laptop or your phone. It's going to use a different protocol to connect to the access point, the wireless access point. Here we talked about 802.11. Use a radio frequency to connect the devices, and there's a protocol that allows us to do this communication. Then over here we talked about the wired situation, like a PC is wired right up, and we talked about the protocol there of going from here to here, and that is Ethernet. 802.3. We don't have to know all the details about that, but we should understand that some protocol is used to get the information from one device to another, and then from that device to another device. And those protocols can change as we move through, for example, through the internet. You know, as we're moving through the internet, different routers could actually use different protocols to get information from one to another. So we have this switch device. Here we're talking about the switch in 229. Here we talked about in 228, and so forth. And then on campus we have this connection to a firewall. We haven't defined that yet entirely, but multi-layered switch here that connects different rooms and buildings and so forth here on campus. One other thing is mentioned on the screen back in the other one. I'll just write it over here. We have a couple different ways to manage addresses, and we're going to emphasize those on Wednesday. We have a physical address in the device that's unique to every device, and that's called a media access control, and we're going to look at those on Wednesday. And then we have a logical address that we have in the device, and we use Internet Protocol, or an IP number. This identifies each device, and this is a logical one that identifies which network you're coming from. So this has both, and it's able then to communicate out here. And then we talked briefly about, we do network address translation. The addresses inside here at least in this area, they're all private addresses, and it gets changed then to a public address in order to go out to the internet. And we'll cover that more specifically the next time too. That is it for today.